Hello and welcome to your favourite programme, Jane's Tips. Maybe you have difficulty using and understanding the modals, les auxiliaires modaux? Well, I hope that will have changed at the end of this lesson. What is a modal? Un modal est un verbe qui te permet d'exprimer un jugement sur ce que tu dis. In fact, using a modal amounts to expressing notions of possibility, impossibility, obligation or probability. I hope everything will be clear at the end of this lesson. Let's take a look at the three most common modals, can, must and may. Can signifie pouvoir, au sens d'être capable de, savoir faire quelque chose. Must exprime le devoir. Et may signifie pouvoir au sens d'être autorisé à. Contrary to the other verbs, they don't take an S in the third person singular of the present tense. Look, he works, but she can, he must, it may. Second grammatical difference. They must be followed by a verb in the infinitive without to. Ils sont toujours suivis d'un verbe à l'infinitif sans to. They can speak English very well. Ils sont capables de très bien parler anglais. Now, what do those modals mean in the present tense? Let's take a look at the grid to understand. Possibility and capacity, can. Impossibility, incapacity, can't. Near certainty, must. Obligation, must or have to. Ban, mustn't. Absence of obligation, don't have to, don't need to, needn't. Probability or eventuality, may. Permission, may. Dans ce tableau, on voit que must and have to sont synonymes dans les phrases affirmatives, mais n'en est pas de même dans les phrases négatives. Dans ces dernières, mustn't exprime l'interdiction, a ban, and don't have to exprime l'absence d'obligation. Have to is not a modal. It is the equivalent of must. And like must, you can use it to express an obligation, especially when that obligation is imposed by a rule. Have to est utilisé pour exprimer une obligation, souvent imposée par un règlement. For example, in England, school children have to wear a uniform. En Angleterre, les enfants sont obligés de porter un uniforme. Note that you can also use have got to instead of have to. Unlike have got to is an auxiliary, so you don't need the auxiliary does or do in negative and interrogative sentences, although you can use it. So you can say either, why does Joe have to go? Or, why has Joe got to go? And Joe doesn't have to go, or Joe hasn't got to go. Must is used when the subject imposes an obligation on someone. Must est utilisé lorsqu'on veut s'imposer ou imposer à quelqu'un une obligation. I must work harder if I want to pass this exam. Je dois travailler, il faut que je travaille davantage si je veux réussir à cet examen. But most of the time, must can be used in the place of have to and vice versa. I have to work harder if I want to pass this exam. Grâce aux modaux, tu n'es pas obligé de faire de la traduction mot à mot. Tu peux te contenter de traduire l'idée. For instance, if you want to say something like « Il nous est impossible de venir », you'll say « We can't come », can't being the modal which expresses impossibility. Likewise, if you want to say « Tu n'es pas obligé de m'attendre », you'll say « You don't have to » or « You needn't or you don't need to wait for me. Before looking at the modals in the past, try to answer this question. If it is always empty, it can't be good. I know that in French you'd say ce restaurant ne doit pas être bon, but in English, mustn't is used to forbid something. Well now, let's see the modals in the past tense, au passé. Again, let's have a look at the grid. possibility, capacity, could or was able to, impossibility, incapacity, couldn't or wasn't able to, obligation, had to, ban, couldn't, wasn't allowed to, absence of obligation, didn't have to, didn't need to, permission, was allowed to, could, probability, can't have plus past participle, must have plus past participle, may or might have plus past participle. Il existe 3 niveaux de probabilité dans le passé. If you are nearly certain, quasiment certain ou certaine of something, you will use can't have plus a past participle. John can't have taken part in the match. He is injured. Ce n'est pas possible que John ait ou John ne peut pas avoir participé au match. Il est blessé. If you are less sure, un peu moins sûr, you will use must have plus a past participle. The door is open. I must have forgotten to lock it. La porte est ouverte. Je dois avoir oublié de la fermer. If you are not at all sure, pas du tout sûr, you will use may or might have plus a past participle. The blinds have been shut for a few weeks. They may have moved out. Les volets sont fermés depuis quelques semaines. Il se peut qu'ils aient déménagé. Now I'd like to say a few words about could and its equivalent, was able to. Could is used for a general ability, une capacité générale. He could speak 4 foreign languages. Il savait parler 4 langues étrangères. Whereas was able to or managed to is used for a particular situation, une situation à un moment donné. The fire started during the night, but everybody was able to or managed to escape. L'incendie s'est déclenché pendant la nuit, mais tout le monde a pu s'échapper. In the negative form, could can also be used in particular situations. Jim played very well, but he couldn't beat Brian. Jim a très bien joué, mais il n'a pas pu battre Brian. Ready for question 2? I'm sure you are. If the fridge was full, why go shopping? You didn't have to go shopping, it wasn't necessary. Now let's study the modals in the future. As we have already seen, can, must and may have equivalents. Can is be able to, must, have to, may be allowed to. It's very important to remember that, because in the future we only use the equivalents. On n'utilise que les équivalents au futur, jamais can, must and may. Will associated with can, must and may is impossible. Now the grid. Possibility, capacity, will be able to. Impossibility, incapacity, won't be able to. Obligation, will have to. Ban, won't be allowed to. Absence of obligation, won't have to, won't need to. Permission, will be allowed to. Note that if you want to use the modals in the conditional, you just have to replace will by would. Remember that the conditional expresses a condition. In this respect, I advise you to have a look at our program, would, could and should. Well, what else can we add about the modals? It's important to understand that by using the modals, you translate ideas, not words. For instance, you can express possibility, but the word possible doesn't appear. You can express probability, but the word probable doesn't appear either. Of course, you can use the words probable or possible, but I advise you to use the modals as often as possible. Okay? Now, here's my last question. He will be able to stay up late, but he won't be allowed to by his parents. This sentence illustrates all the difference between can and may, even though both are translated by the verb pouvoir. Can means that the subject is able to do something. Le sujet est capable de faire quelque chose. May means that the subject is allowed to do something. Le sujet est autorisé à faire quelque chose. I remember when I was a child, I asked my teacher, "Can I open the window, please?" He answered, "You can, but you may not." Do you understand? Tu peux, parce que tu es capable de le faire, mais tu ne peux pas parce que tu n'es pas autorisé à le faire. Bye for now and see you next time.